Hey, welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Kunal, your host, and today we're here with a very special guest, Jameel Aalim-Johnson, an associate vice president at NASDAQ, at the Office of Government Relations. Yeah, NASDAQ, as in New York, Wall Street, pretty cool stuff. And he is also a former chief of staff to Congressman Gregory Meeks. And a community liaison for Congressman Floyd Flake, and a former president of the House of Representatives Chiefs of Staff Association, and the former executive director of Rockaway Development and Revitalization Corporation, nonprofit community development organization. So it is we're very happy to have you on the show this evening, and happy you made the time to come on.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. All right.
I'm not really good at doing self-marketing, but I was fortunate this summer. I've gone from associate vice president to vice president. So
there we go. See, the more positive news, the better. So let's get into this. Just for our viewers, I guess talk a little bit about your background, how you went from you basically working on the Hill in Congress to now a vice president at NASDAQ, working in government relations, and touch on how your college education. I'm an aspiring, college student. How that prepared you for the roles you have.
well, very interestingly enough, I never planned on taking the path that I did. It goes back to the issue where the Quran says, men plan, but Allah is the best of planners. When I was in school, I attended University of Virginia as my undergraduate degree. I majored in economics. So my plan initially was to go to Wall Street. And that's the kind of jobs I was looking for when I graduated.
Right.
And it came to a point, I took a job at the Internal Revenue Service and Taxpayer Service Division.
Oh, the IRS.
Yep, IRS, not necessarily everybody's friend, even mine. But I was then offered, I had been when I came home, my mother and some other people like Gregory Meeks was working on a campaign for a minister who was running for Congress. His name was Floyd Flake.
Right.
So, having that kind of post college vigor, I decided to work on the campaign with no interest in working in politics at all, but I just thought it was a good thing to do for the community.
Right.
Being involved. He won, and around the same time that he won, I applied for a job with a company called Morgan Guaranty Trust that was located on Wall Street. And when Flake won, his chief of staff asked me to come in and interview. So I did, and I was actually offered both jobs, the one at Morgan Guaranty Trust and the one at Flake's office. Even though I had really did not have a strong interest in politics and wanted to go to Wall Street, I looked at the Flake position as an opportunity to do something for my community. So I ended up taking that position, and that's what got me into politics.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for about a year and a half, and then I went to a place called Greater Jamaica Development, which was what they call Local Development Corporation. I was there for 5 years there. Then I moved over to Rockaway Development, which was a similar type of organization, but this was more directly in the neighborhood in which I lived. So I felt, again, I could do something to help benefit my own community. During that time, I went to grad school to major in international finance and said, hey, it's time to get back into, it's time to get into Wall Street and do the finance job I wanted to do when I graduated from UVA.
Mm-hmm.
Around that same time, Floyd Flake had chosen to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Gregory Meeks, who headed the Democratic Club that I was a part of, had at that time become an assemblyman and decided to run for Flake's seat. And when he won, he said, hey, come on down to Washington with me. So he knew I was looking to make a move. So he invited me to come down. He was on the banking committee.
Yeah.
So I ended up, being in Washington as his chief of staff.
Wow. That's my dream. So I'm very happy that you were able to have that experience working on. I just came back from Washington, so I could taste it, just
Mm-hmm.
that power and those corridors. But no, that's a fabulous story. Now I want to quickly transition to talk about the aim of this kind of project that I run, which is to stress the importance of voting rights in our country right now, in this tumultuous time period. And I want to go back to the year 2020. Could be, very, very, fear encompassing. It was a very weird year, pandemic, once in a century, a historic election, top to bottom, everywhere, including Georgia and the entire country. But I just want to hear your thoughts on the year 2020 and kind of what was going through your head when you saw all these events. And you're in the financial center of the world. So, I just want to know your perspective on these events that are happening in our country.
Well, this is a very interesting time, even from the time that I came on the Hill, which was back in 1998.
Mm.
I've never seen the parties more divided. As a matter of fact, somebody I worked with once said, I don't think the country has been this divided since, either pre or just post-Civil War.
I say the same thing, actually. In fact, when January 6th happened, right, I was glued to the TV screen. I was like, screw school. This is history in the making. And I said, I quickly, messaged my teachers, my history teachers, all my professors, folks. I said, this looks like pre-Civil War. This looks like we're on the brink of going to civil war because we had studied it. It's in our knowledge, it's in our history. But no, do continue.
No, no problem. I mean, on that particular day, because of COVID-19, I've been working from home
Right.
for the time for a year and a half. And at that time so I had the TV on next to me because I knew the vote count was taking place. And you saw at first the marches that were taking place down near the White House. And then a friend of mine said, hey, man, are you watching this? He said, they are storming. And I turned and looked because I kind of stopped paying attention because I'm just hearing, news people talk about demonstrations, so on and so forth. And you get used to that demonstrations a lot when you're in DC.
Right.
Then I turn and I see the crowd now taking over places where I, as a staffer with an ID, could not just walk up. And I'm saying to myself, how in the world are they letting these people just enter? I mean, it was amazing how, just unprepared they were. And the total lack of any semblance of force in dealing with these groups. So we looked at that and said, this is really amazing. And it really made you realize something I've kind of always known. But the fact of the matter is there are still people in this country who believe, going back to the original draft of the Constitution, before the amendments, pre-Bill of Rights, well, not pre-Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights amendments, but before you got to things like the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments,
Right.
who really believe that this is supposed to be a white male Christian country and that other people are not supposed to have the same rights as they are. And it reminded me that, voting rights, which is something that was fought so hard by some people to get, but also fought against by some people to keep others from having, is really a tool and a weapon to protect yourself. If you really look at African-American history in this country, even though the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments were passed, which ended slavery, gave everyone born or naturalized citizenship, and then gave citizenship rights, the reality is that those rights were not protected for almost years.
Yeah.
Even to the point where cases that went up to the Supreme Court basically said it is not the federal government's right to protect the rights of the citizens. It's the state's job to do that. But it was the very states that were keeping these people from voting.
Right.
And so it was like saying it's not the owner's job to protect the hens from the fox. It's the fox's job to protect the hens, which obviously makes no sense if the fox is.
Right.
So, trying to, I really have developed a focus, used to be a focus just on trying to get the African American community to register and get voting. But since I've moved to Maryland,
Hmm.
I've had a huge focus on getting the Muslim community to get registered to vote and to become active, to participate in the system, and to make sure that our voice and our influence matters.
Yeah, no, and we commend you for that. It's funny. I would say the guaranteed right to vote in this country wasn't for everybody, wasn't truly satisfied until I'd say 1965.
Mhm.
Passed the Voting Rights Act. You're right. After the Civil War, the production of 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, it was subverted by the KKK and political expediency, and honestly political corruption. There was no will to fight for everybody's freedom to vote.
Mhm.
And I see a lot of parallels to today, where states like Georgia, Texas are passing voting rights restrictions
Mhm.
and oppression on minority communities, which is, we're going back in time. We're not moving forward. And I want to ask a very simple question. There's only really one answer to it. But if you have another, I'd love to hear that one too. Um, is voting important?
Well, let me mention two things on that. I'm going to mention as a comment on what you just said
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is that you mentioned voting rights being subverted by the KKK. Even that is a simplification because the fact of the matter is that the voting rights were subverted not just by the KKK, but by the elected officials, by law enforcement, and
Yeah.
by the court system.
Yeah, literacy taxes, grandfather clauses. I mean, the list goes on. You had to pay. Sometimes you had to pay to vote, and African Americans at the time had zero employment. So
Mhm.
it was, anyway.
There was one state in particular, and I can't remember what state off the
Yeah,
top of my head, because of the poll tax that ended up affecting not only poor African Americans, but affected the poor, period. So it was a point where like 3% of the people who should be eligible to vote were actually able to vote because poor whites could not afford the taxes either, which meant everyone elected was supporting the rich elite.
right.
It was only the rich elite who could vote. Now, you're right. To answer your question, is it important? Of course it is. I think the thing to understand is why is it important? I think that people who aren't very clear on it should go back and watch the movie Selma.
Good movie.
Because one of the things that you saw in Selma is it was, and like I said, this isn't just a question of prejudiced people,
Mhm.
not other people to have the right to vote and participate fully in society. This has been ingrained into the government systems in many places, in many states.
Mhm.
Said, you see, immediately after Georgia loses, which is typically have been reliably a red state, loses the presidency, and both senators, what's the first thing that they do? Is they look at the voting procedure that allowed places like Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is,
Yeah.
to really turn that vote. And they say, okay, how can we put in place certain things that will negatively affect the right to vote in Fulton County? And so that we have more control as a Republican state legislature over what votes count in Fulton County. That was the whole point of that exercise. And you see it being followed in Texas because Texas is changing demographically. So they want to make it harder. And these are the same states that were singled out in the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And so the issue of how you get your voice heard, and I go back to the movie Selma, where even people like the sheriff, even in Maryland, the sheriff is elected. Once those people got their rights to vote, the first thing they did was they voted out the sheriff, right? They were able to vote out those people out of office who were part of their oppression. But if I often say, look, somebody's getting elected, particularly to those members of whether it be the African American community or the Muslim community who feels that voting doesn't matter. I tell them, look, when there's an election, somebody's going to win. You're not being involved. This is not like not showing up to a meeting so that there's not a quorum, so business can't take place. There's going to be an election and somebody's going to win. Either you can choose who's best for you, or you can let somebody else choose who's best for you. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to use that. And everybody's
all yours.
Yeah, everybody's going to pretend it's mine, unless they watch this podcast, right? Well, no, that's definitely sound advice. And on the topic of advice, I want to ask a last question, because I know you have to maintain the financial center of the world. I know it's in
Got that on my shoulders.
Exactly. So I gotta let you go soon. What is your advice to Gen Z, my generation? I don't know where they got Z from. Seems arbitrary, but nevertheless,
Who's after why?
True. What do you think we should do when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to folks interested in finance, or even the ignorant folks who don't know what to do, look at events like January 6th and say, what's the point? What is your advice to those people?
I'm going to say a few things, and I'll say them really quickly. One, understand history of empowerment in the United States. And there are two things that go hand in hand: politics and economics. They're two sides of the same coin. They're brothers and sisters, they're yin and yang, whatever you want to call it. They go hand in hand. And it goes back to the writing of the Constitution. But if you really want to understand how politics and economics have been used against certain people, read a book called White Rage, and you will understand the reasons why you can't sit back and just wait for things to happen, and understand why you have to be involved in both politics and strengthen your own economics so that you have more control and more influence in society. Young people need to realize that what politics is about is deciding what the policies are, who they're targeted to benefit and who they're targeted to hurt, and ultimately where the resources are spent. Are they going to be spent in your community, or are they going to be spent in somebody else's community? There's a reason why there was so much time, effort, money, and lives put in to try to keep certain people from voting. Yes. So it's not a light thing. It's not pre-rigged. You can make a difference. We have seen, governments change. Here in the United States, whether it be state governments or federal governments, change because of the fact that certain people got involved when they did. Barack Obama was not elected other than the fact that new people got involved and decided they wanted to see a change. So get involved. You can make a difference.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, no, I thank you very much for coming on the show. You're always welcome back with any new advice, any new topics, any advice you want to give me on what I should be investing on, we can have, aside from this podcast.
NASDAQ does not offer investment advice. That's the thing that goes underneath the.
Well, I mean,
we're a technology platform, not an investment advisor. But I would say this to you as a young person. You start making money regularly, start putting a certain percentage of it aside right away. Look at things like some money toward retirement, some money toward buying, real estate, and some money toward, something you want to invest in, whether it be an entrepreneurial side or if you just want to be an investor. Learn to save early, because it is through regular savings and investment that one builds wealth. If one, a basketball, an athlete, an entertainer or something to that effect, or something where you get a huge check. Yeah. Most people spend more than they save.
Right. No,
So,
that makes sense.
build net worth, assets, develop assets.
Yeah, no, I definitely. But no, nonetheless, thank you so much for coming on the show. We do appreciate your time, and do take care of yourself and Wall Street for me, please. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I
Of
appreciate
course.
it. Take care.